everyone. I forgot how beautiful it is here in this celebration. I forgot. How could I do that? I used to come here. I lived here about 10 years ago or so. But before I launch into that, I just want to say that one of the plaques that was in the front of the classroom in my ministry school said, "Bidden or unbidden, God is present." I love that. And I want to acknowledge God's presence here with us, His love energy in this room. But I always like to also invite other holy beings to be with us today, to be here in this room and in our hearts, and with whoever might hear this talk or this celebration later. So I think 9 years ago, in January was the last time I was here, and something very special happened that I want to tell you about. Some of you might remember a piece of it, but it was a really poignant time in my life. I was a caregiver at the time. I had been working with hospice, and it became corporate, and it lost its soul, this particular place, and so I became a private duty caregiver. And there was one client that I had who was a delightful woman. She was about 85, and she was really down to earth and fun and had all these beautiful stories. She was a career woman way ahead of her time. I think she was a scientist, which is really amazing. And my job was to pick her up every 3 weeks or so and help her into my car with her wheelchair and take her to the hospital to get blood transfusions. And so this would happen every 3 weeks or so. And then it was nearing Christmas, and I had this very strong feeling that I needed to go visit her in her home just as a regular person, just as a friend, to bring a poinsettia and just say, that I really like you as a person, not just because you write me a check, right? And so this feeling was persistent, and I'm ashamed to say I just let life get in the way, and I never followed through. And then, days passed, Christmas passed, and I thought, wow, I haven't been with Nan for a while. And so I called up the woman who organizes the rides, and I asked about her, and she had passed. And I was just heartsick that I missed this opportunity to convey at a deeper level how special I thought she was. And so I decided at that point, next time I have intuition, I'm going to listen. It's very important to listen to our guidance, right? And so about a month passed, and I had the opportunity. I had another very strong feeling that I needed to go be with my family. And they all lived 2,000 miles away in Pennsylvania. And here I was here, and as it so happens when you care for people, a number had just passed on. And so I didn't have much income at that time, and I didn't know how to buy a plane ticket to get out there. But I thought, I can't let that stop me. I have to get there. How will I do that? And I thought, I'm going to make an announcement at the celebration. And I chickened out. The first Sunday, I just totally chickened out because it's not easy to ask for help. And then the next Sunday, I said, I have to do it. And it just so happened it was the Sunday that the Tibetan monks were here. And it was packed, do you remember? It was standing room only. And so I shared what was going on in my life, and bless your hearts, you totally came through. Someone gave me frequent flyer miles, and someone gave me cash, and someone gave me a check, and I was able to get home. And so the next part of the story is, 3 days after I got there, my brother and my mother and I were playing games in the living room. We had a card table, we loved to play games, the fire was lit, it was very lovely. And then I noticed this very odd expression on my mother's face. And I said, Mom, what's going on? And she said, I feel funny. And she didn't have any other explanation, and so we just went back to playing, but I kept on looking at her like, something is going on. So I asked her for, more, can you tell me what you're feeling? And she said a couple things, and then when she mentioned her left arm, I thought, she's having a heart attack. And so here's the benefit of listening, the wisdom of listening to your intuition. I really believe if I hadn't been there, she might never have gone to the hospital, because I am certain my brother and father would not have recognized the signs. I mean, hopefully most of you know now that women's heart attacks look very different from men's. The symptoms can be very subtle, and so just trust your gut and listen to your gut, because your gut will know. So, so this talk is about listening to our inner guidance, our intuition, the still small voice that's within us all. Sometimes it's a loud voice, sometimes it's a persistent voice, but I'm sure many of us have had that little nagging feeling of something or other, and we need to listen. So those were two examples of when I learned that I really need to listen. I'm sure we all know there's other ways we can tune in. We might hear songs on the radio or see a certain phenomenon in the sky or whatever. There's many ways for God to get through, but one way it doesn't work is when we're very, 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 very busy, which is what we tend to do in this country, right? Like, we grow up with not being allowed to be still. You know, if you're at, oh, I'm sorry, thank you. You know, we're not allowed to dawdle or daydream when we're kids. And when we're grown-ups, when we're adults, it's like, work, 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 make money, do your chores, clean the house, exercise, go to this party, this event. It's always action-oriented. We're very achievement-oriented in this country, and we're not rewarded for sitting down and doing nothing, right? But that's the way God gets through to us when we're quieter. And we have to really make an effort. I'm guessing many of you here probably do meditate. But I ran into a wise friend in Montana a month ago who said, you know, even if you can't calm your mind down, the trick is to sit down and to be quiet. And that's how these messages trickle through. So yesterday, as I was driving in the car for hours and hours and hours, I had this SSS little clue. We need to be still, we need to be silent, and we need solitude. And, you know, the people in the eastern hemisphere of the world, they kind of get this better than us. We have to support each other in doing that, I think. So if you can't remember those three, there's two really easy ones. Sit down, shut up. So, you know, I was realizing that even when we sit down and watch TV, we're still outward oriented. Almost everything we do in the world is outward oriented. And we've learned what happens in this world when we cultivate that male side of our being, that yang, go, go, go side. You know, we need the balance. So women have a more internal, receptive nature, ideally. Think of when a woman is gestating new birth in her womb, right? She will try to do everything out in the world, but a large part of her focus becomes internalized because there's this new life inside of her. And so that's the trick, I think, for all of us, whether we're male or female, is to tune into this inner world more and to just allow the wisdom that comes with that inner world to percolate to the surface. So I have another story. After I lived here, I moved to Colorado, and I loved it there also. I loved it here, I loved it there. And I started getting the message I was supposed to move, and the place that popped into my head was Mount Shasta, which is a very sacred place in Northern California. So, and I didn't know why I was supposed to be there, I just went. So one of the really fascinating things that happened when I was there is I was told about this sacred hill that was about 2 miles down the road next to this lake. And I made it my spiritual practice a couple times a week it was a pretty tall hill, to go up this serpentine path to the very top. And there was a flat area up top that had 360-degree views. And it was a very powerful place because you felt up there with the sky energies, but you were standing on the earth energies, And there was Mount Shasta, and then all these beautiful hills all around. It was very, very powerful, beautiful place. And I liked it because I could go sing and pray pretty loudly, but still feel like I had some privacy because I was all the way up there, you know? Well, one day I was in bed in the morning and I just felt like, get to the hill, get to the hill. Don't take a shower, don't eat, just get to the hill. Don't pass go, just get there. And so I did. I threw all my clothes and I went. And so this path, it kind of Z's and then it circles around. And when I was almost at the top, I heard this glorious singing, just like harmonious and reverent and heavenly. It was exquisite, and I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear this music. And I was very curious what I was going to find when I got to the top. So I got to the top, and I look, and there's 4 nuns in white robes sitting in camp chairs facing Mount Shasta. And so I just kind of sat to the side. I didn't want to interrupt them. And I tried to meditate, but a part of me was listening. When are they going to get up? Because I want to meet them. And so I met these beautiful women. They were younger than me. They were very radiant, beautiful beings. They weren't like stern. They weren't, they were really cool. And but not to make judgments about nuns, sorry. So, and I did grow up Catholic. But long story short, we met there again the next day and to pray together, and I discovered that they were speaking Portuguese, and I realized they were from Brazil. And their order had sent them to create this tiny monastery of 4 people in Mount Shasta to just blanket the area with prayer, and which is always a good thing to do, and the world needs it very badly. And this order does it very beautifully. So that second day when I saw them, I just had this feeling that we were going to be friends further. Did anybody turn that on by any chance? Oh, good. Sorry. That we were going to be friends for the rest of our lives. And so it was true. And I ended up going to Brazil to experience this spiritual community that the monastery is part of. And there are a lot of regular people that live there or visit there as well. So it's miles and miles of land with multiple buildings, and they grow their own food. And some people stay there permanently, and some visit for days or weeks or months at a time. But they're all committed to this work. And what the work is for them is they're very aware of this time on the planet and what a powerful time we're living in right now, with major changes and earth changes and lots of things happening on many, many levels. And they are here to help with that transition. That's part of their purpose. And how they work is there are 3 visionaries in the order who are not channels. They actually see and hear Christ and Mary, and sometimes Saint Joseph, who I have learned is a much greater, wiser, amazing being than we've all realized. We tend to think of him as just this humble carpenter, but he's actually a very wise being. And because he was in earth in human form, he's uniquely qualified to help us navigate these times, because he knows what it's like to be human. Anyway, the reason I share this story is I believe it's one of the reasons I was guided to Mount Shasta, but also one of the key messages that Jesus occasionally will refer to in these messages that he brings to the community is go inside to your heart, and that's where I'll be. That's where I can guide you. That's where we can commune. It's in your heart. And I found that really wonderful because in my mind, there's 2 main messages that Jesus had when he was on earth that he was sharing with us. One was to love one another. Absolutely, in my view, the most important message ever. And the second one is the kingdom of heaven is within. And I don't hear many people talk about that. I find that very interesting. And I think it's really hugely significant the founder of that spiritual community, before the monastery wasn't there in the beginning. It was more a Zen-like community. And he was teaching repeatedly that he wanted silence as much as possible so that people could go into their inner world, because that's where we're guided. And then, of course, it ended up Christ confirmed that message later. So I think many of us in this culture, when we're growing up, we tend to think of God as this old white man in the sky with a beard, sitting on a throne with a staff. And, it doesn't necessarily resonate with many of us, but I think it's an unconscious thing that pops in. I think many of us probably here think of God more as an energy. It's not gender specific, and it's not necessarily in human form, he, she, spirit, it. It's a vast energy of wisdom and love that permeates everything. So I don't know if any of you have had near-death experiences, but I'm sure you've read about them. And one thing they have in common is how there's this beautiful, ineffable, gorgeous, loving energy that permeates the universe, the multiverses, the universe upon universe upon universe, is filled with so much love that we cannot even conceive of it, because this earth, as you were saying, is a harsh place to be sometimes, and you can't always find that love. But God isn't just out there and around that. He's also, he, she, spirit is inside us. And there was a wise being that I once met, or several times met, who would guide us in meditations. And he would be taking us out beyond our universe, beyond the next universe, beyond all the many, many universes, to the place where there aren't universes, there aren't stars, there aren't planets. There's this place of source where I believe we all came from. But then he did something that I don't see many people do. He took us to our internal worlds, which are just as vast, which I find very mind-bending. But it's like, just as there's an infinite outward, there's an infinite inward. And in between all the cells of our bodies and all the molecules of our bodies, there's all this space, just like there is out there. Like, we have universes inside of us. Like, isn't that an amazing thing? And in those universes is the same love that's out there, if we can tune into it and remember. So how do we cultivate this atmosphere of receptivity in our life? I think we schedule times to be still and quiet and just shut up and listen. And it doesn't always, I don't think it necessarily has to mean being sitting, although that probably is good. But sometimes even just walking and being in nature. And actually that is the one other thing I wanted to mention. So earlier this year, I had this beautiful position with this lovely lady, and I started getting this message that I was supposed to travel the country, not go to Africa and, help the orphans and the starving children, but travel the country. It was such a persistent message that I finally realized I needed to listen. And I gave notice to my employer, and when I realized I couldn't afford to buy a truck and a camper, I started buying, camping equipment so I could do this journey, because I wanted Spirit to know that I was listening and I was willing to do what they asked, even though I didn't know the whys. And there were a few things that were intentions that unfolded in my mind as I was anticipating this journey. One was to go to sacred places, to be in the energy of these sacred beings and these sacred places on the planet. And there's quite a few in this country. If you look, you'll start to find them, and I can tell you about some. But also to go to the places where there's wounding. This year I became very conscious of the specifics of the genocide we inflicted on our ancestors inflicted on Native people. And I began researching where were these specific massacres, and there were many that were on the western coast, and I made it my intention to go to some of these places and just really do like heartfelt prayer ceremony for the spirits of those that were gone and the spirits of those that remain, and for the earth herself. But the other part of the journey that I wasn't expecting is that as we take ourselves away from all the responsibilities and all the do messages that we get, if we can just come back to stillness and slowness, to slow our life down and be in nature and be at the pace of nature, messages can just trickle in, and the communion with spirit is so much deeper. So, as you all know, our brothers and sisters in India have an expression, Namaste. The God in me honors the God in you. And although not every single person we ever meet feels godlike, if we can remember there's a speck of divinity in each of us because we inherited it from the Creator that created us, then what a world it will be, right? How can we inflict harm on someone when we see the God in them? So, the God in me honors the God in you. And thank you.